This is my world. Pretty cool, right? Wrong. Because even after making this beautiful map, I still don't know enough about the world to write a book in it. Even worse, the last time I tried world building for a series was the first time. It took a whole month, and throughout the process, I flip-flopped more than a pair of rainbows. That's my foot. And although I've done some world building since then, I've never tried building such a complex world again. But March is on the way, and I've still got some intense outlining left to do before Camp NaNoWriMo. So I don't have time to spend another month figuring this out. I've got 5 days, and by day 5, I need to have built a world fit to be an epic fantasy setting. The first thing that I'm going to do is basically what I did in that N.K. Jemisin video. So I'm going to figure out these world building details for every single culture one at a time. Let's start off here with the first culture, Eastern Coalition. So I created this basic document that I'm going to use to fill out all this world building information, and it stems directly from that N.K. Jemisin process. Some of the stuff I already figured out, but I just want to get it all in one place. I already do have a lot of the details for this Eastern Coalition figured out. I figured out a lot of this stuff when I was working on the magic system, so I was really focusing on just filling in the stuff that I already have. Now we can actually get into figuring out some new things. So I went deep on various aspects of the culture and of the society. However, we don't have time to talk about every single one of these details without making this video super long. So let's just talk about religion, because I think that was one of the most interesting aspects. The magic itself was connected to the religion because they believed that the magic was given to them by the sun god. The sun god is not the only god in the religion. There is also a god of darkness, which is represented by the moon. And besides the gods themselves, they believe every single element of nature has its own spirit, whether this is the spirit of the mountains or rivers, oceans, fish, or other animals. Each of these has its own spirit, and this ties into the way they behave around food as well. So for instance, because they have to hunt to survive, they really try to respect the creatures that they're killing, and they use every single part of the creature except for the head, because they believe the head is the source of the animal's soul. When they kill the animal, they will never aim for the head or anything like that. And after they finish processing the animal and gathering every single part of it that they're going to use, they will actually bury the head underground, because they believe that this head will grow into a fully grown animal with the same soul as the one they've killed. So this religion is only one aspect of the world building. I feel like I've gotten to a really good place for this Eastern Coalition. So next, I'm going to move on to doing this same process for the Western Coalition. So I'm back and I'm ready to continue. There's only one little problem here. As you can see, I have no internet. It's kind of windy outside right now, and because of that, it seems like the internet has just bailed on me, so I'm going to just do as much as I can without it. So I just finished up with the world building of the Western civilization, really looking through these aspects and trying to fill them out. And there were many things that were similar with the East. Because these two societies have descended from the same ancestor society, they do have a lot in common, but their differences in values and the passage of time has caused some shifts in all the different aspects of their cultures. And one of these aspects I thought was most interesting with the Western society is their type of communication they use. So in the East, they're very much more direct in their communication. They want somebody to have the strength to withstand the truth and directness. Whereas in the West, they want to take care of people's emotions and they value perceptiveness. So being able to perceive things in conversation is seen as something valuable as well. So they communicate much more subtly in the West. And there are various terms that I came up around this. So one of these terms is being able to feel the heat. This is basically being able to read social situations and more of like the subtle cues, and it harkens back to the ability to perceive heat that's part of the magic. Because people are expected to be able to have this perception, and perception is highly valued, those that cannot really perceive these things and don't really have finely tuned perceptions are kind of looked down upon and maybe labeled by people behind their backs. So that was one of the interesting aspects of this world building for the Western society, and I think I'm going to call it here for the day. And next I'm gonna have to work on one that I don't know as much about, which is why I think that one deserves a full day, and that is the Southern Empire. So I will see you to continue with work on that tomorrow. Before we get started, I do want to talk a little bit here. As you may be able to tell, it's already light outside, and the reason why is that I had a little bit of a slow start to the day. I wasn't really feeling that good when I got up, and I had to take some time to think through some things, to journal a little bit, get myself back on the right mental track. And because of that, it's almost 8 o'clock. I'm getting started a little bit late today. I still would like to get the world building done for this third civilization. I've worked through all of the basics of the society. The main 3 sociological factors I decided to focus on for the society were element X, and this is just, some sort of magical element. The government, because it is an empire, and I wanted to focus on how it is structured, as well as the taboos and mores. Now I'm ready to move on to finding out how these reflect onto the rest of society. And actually, we have internet back. I'm actually ready to be able to look up some stuff on Google or ChatGPT or whatever, and actually be able to search things while I'm figuring this out. And listen to music. Oh my God, it's gonna be great. Okay, let's just keep going with this process. I've got a few more things to work on from scratch, and then I wanna go back through and make sure that all of this stuff for this third culture is looking good. So I just finished up working through the world building for this third culture, and one of the things I think is most interesting is something I'm calling element X for now, and this is totally taken from N.K. Jemisin. That's what she called it, the magical element of the world, some sort of resource that has magic to it. I'm thinking that the reason that these people from the south are trying to encroach on the territory of the northern peoples is because they found that in the mountains of the north there are tons of mineral deposits with this element in them, and they found this element really useful in their society. Maybe there's actually a magical quality to the element in that if you craft something out of this element, say for instance is armor, the armor, it doesn't actually get any lighter. It's still just as heavy and just as tough as it would be normally, except to the wearer it feels lighter. So this is just one little thing that I've been thinking about with regard to this metal, and I worked this into the history of the government a little bit and how the emperor ended up taking power in this region. So that's a tiny hint into the world building around this third society. There's a lot of other stuff that I figured out too, but once again, try not to make the video 10 hours. And now that I finished this basic level of world building, I want to move on to the next step for all 3 of these cultures. And this is figuring out a little bit more of the history of these cultures. And the reason why I want to specifically highlight this is because of what I learned when reading these 7 epic fantasy novels. As you'll remember, one of my takeaways was that I really liked these mysterious aspects of the societies, these mysteries that exist in how things arose, and these complex webs of history. So that is what I'm going to work on here, really flesh this out and create this world of mystery. So I finished quite a bit of work on this mysterious history, as I'm calling it, for those northern coalitions. I'm starting to piece together some of the other aspects, like the relationships between them since the time they split off, and things that may have happened, and kind of the reasoning why they have certain attitudes toward each other and whatnot. I'm going to call it here for the day, and I will see you tomorrow to continue with more world building. This time to continue working on this history stuff, trying to figure out the mysteries of the history for these different groups. I'm going to continue working on the North overall, but I also have some things that I want to focus on for the Western Coalition and their specific history. So I just spent a bunch of time figuring out what happened when this original coalition split off into 2. How did this happen? What were the consequences? And how were they able to actually make this work? Those were the various things that I was just figuring out here, and I ended up writing quite a bit in order to actually figure this out. And one thing I figured out in this process was how the element X, the metal that the Southerners use, ties into the magic of the people of the North. And I think this will be interesting to explore. So I'm realizing that I think I actually finished all of this historical part that I wanted to work on. I don't want to define all of this stuff already, because as the story continues, as I'm writing these various books, I want to have the world building be able to serve the story, and I don't think that it's really possible for me to just come up with all of that beforehand in a way that will work like thematically. I am going to move on to the next step of the world building process that I wanted to knock out, and that is dealing with language and naming. Now, I'm not really planning on naming everything like I did in some previous videos, but what I do want to do is come up with a naming convention and sort of the language roots for these different cultures. And I'm going to start with these two cultures of the North, obviously because their cultures are very much connected and were connected in the past. The two languages that they're based on are going to be very similar, maybe even the same language with just a different dialect. Oh yeah, and it's also a really good way of internet for this because I definitely need it for this part. So I was working on a bunch of naming related things, figuring out what language the Northern Society is going to be based on and how things are going to be different between the two of them. So I ended up coming up with this table basically, and this is kind of like the differences in the way that they pronounce things among the two dialects. So I decided to base this society on Urdu because it has this characteristic of different letters being kind of tied together. So I decided that what I would do to distinguish these two different societies from each other and their dialects is that the society on the east, who is more militaristic, this society pronounces things in a harsher way, in a harder way, and the society in the west, who values beauty, who values caring, and has a little bit of a softer sort of delicate nature, they pronounce things in a little bit more of a softer way. I'm basically substituting the harder sounds for softer sounds in the west, and then substituting softer sounds for harder sounds in the east. And this creates this feeling that you can tell there's similarities between the two languages in the way they pronounce things and the names of people, but they still feel different enough that you can tell the differences between the two cultures. I think I'm going to move on to the language of the Southern Empire now. And for the southern group of people, I was looking through a bunch of different possibilities, whether it be Czech or Thai or Korean or all sorts of things. But eventually I settled on Finnish because, I don't know, I like the words. I think it sounds kind of cute. So no, particularly story relevant reason. It's just like the language. I think it'd be cool to use. Also, the names feel a little bit different from traditional like European sorts of names. It could give the people from this place a sort of distinctive feel. That's another reason why I like this language. So I actually was just spending a little bit of time working on the language a little more because I didn't want to just take it directly from Finnish. So I changed it up by mapping some letters to other things, removing some letters. So for instance, I got rid of the B and the F sound such that both of them map over to P's. But anyway, I took a little bit of time to create some of these rules. This will help me create some more unique names that don't sound exactly like they're just Finnish. So now what I want to do is, first of all, get some of these names in Plotter, and second, I want to start naming some of the other things in the world building. Maybe name some of these countries. I didn't name anybody from the southern country yet, and I can at least name the emperor down there. I know that there's some gods that exist in the northern area, and potentially just name some other world building stuff. I just finished naming a ton of things. I put a bunch of the names into Plotter, the names of the people. I named different terms, concepts. I want to name the countries themselves using their language. I named them with the language of the southern people because they're going to be the ones who draw a map potentially. But I want the northerners to have their own names in their language. And I think their names are going to stem from the people who originally split off the whole country into the two separate ones. Anyway, I'm making really good progress with this, but time is just flying away from me without really realizing it, so I am going to finish up the rest tomorrow. So what I'm going to work on here first is making the language of the North a little bit more unique, so it's not just like Urdu plus a few little exceptions. And then I want to start naming the countries themselves, the different coalitions, in their own language. So I just went on a tear naming things. Oh my god, I went hard. First of all, I named the countries in their own language. I actually named the language itself. I also went to update the language to make it a little bit more easy to read. Basically, there were too many Q's in the Eastern dialect, and Q is not exactly the easiest letter to read for English speakers, so I just got rid of that. And that was only the beginning, because then I ended up doing something a little bit savage. Here, I'll show you. So I divided the map into regions where different tribes would be, and then I ended up naming all of the tribes. And one thing that's kind of interesting is that the Eastern people name tribes based on like who they are, and the Western people name them based on where they live. To be honest, I could go further. I could name more stuff, especially like naming some stuff in the South. But given that, once again, there's not going to be any perspectives from people that live in the South, I don't think it's necessary for me to start naming all of these things in the South at this point. So actually, I'm going to call it here for naming, and I'm going to move on to the next and final step that I wanted to do in this world building, and that is creating a world building document. Now, the reason why I really want to do this is because it makes it so much easier to organize things in the future. I've done a bunch of world building here. I've laid the groundwork, but when I'm actually writing, I'm going to need to expand on that. I'm going to need to add new things as they come up, and I need a way to organize all this information, and right now the organization is kind of bad. So what I'm going to do is create a wiki, and I'll have different pages in that wiki, and I'll make it so that it's easy to search through and find things in, and that way it should be very easy for me to organize all of this world building. So let's get started on creating this wiki and see what we can do. It's only day 4 and we're getting pretty close to the end here, so I don't know. So let me show you what I've got so far. Well, I guess the first thing to note is that I did name some other stuff. For instance, I created a temporary name for the book / actually the series name. I have no idea. It feels a little bit fantasy-like, and it also includes the bond element, which is part of the magic, so you know, whatever. I'm not really sure what it's going to be called, but that's my temporary name. I split it all up into physical world and cultural world just to make it a little bit easier to like navigate for myself. Physical, it's just going to be like stuff about like the actual world itself. I didn't fill anything in yet. I was just trying to create like the scaffolding for the rest. You can see there's no countries in the southern continent yet. That's because I don't know any of them. And for each of these countries, I just filled in like all this stuff. So the next step is to go through and actually start filling some of this stuff out, just putting in the information that I've got for each of these points, and potentially creating other articles if I need to go in a little bit more depth. So I was working on filling out this physical world page. A lot of it I just put in some like template stuff, but I did come up with a few more names as well. Like I named the magic, and I named that element X thing, and then I created some basic descriptions for them. What I want to do next is fill in the cultural world building section on my wiki. I've got quite a bit to do for each of these cultures, so I'm just gonna throw in some music and get going. I was just working through a ton of stuff here. I filled out everything for the 2 first coalitions, at least everything that I have. That's the first one, and then the second one is here. So I went pretty hard on getting all of those in a good position. I really feel like this is coming together better than the world building I did in the previous series. So it's good to see that I'm at least improving at the way that I go about this world building and what I'm deciding to actually focus on. Because all the things I decided to focus on in this are the important aspects of these cultures and should be important aspects for the story as well. Anyway, I will see you tomorrow to continue the work for the last day of this world building. Let's go. And I'm going to start by plugging in the world building I've already got for the Southern Empire into my new wiki. So I just finished up working through putting in all of this baseline information for the third country of the South. I gave it a freaking name, I'm not calling it that. And I also added these little maps for all of the different countries. I don't know. It's not really necessary. So the next thing I want to focus on is just going through and creating some pages for the topics that I think will definitely need them in the future, where I'm going to have to keep track of some details as I'm writing. So I'm going to go through and create those pages, and then I think this wiki is going to be done. So I created a bunch of placeholder pages, but now I'm realizing that there's one more thing that I want to do, and that is to fill in the magic system. I already have all this information from my magic system brainstorming, so I'm going to create a nice page to keep all of the official canon ideas, and then I will be done with this entire world building process. I will have created the foundations for this world. I just finished the entire page on the actual magic itself, and I even learned how to use little spoiler tags. Now I have an easy way to store all this world building information, modify it in the future, and to keep track of what is canon basically. I'm really happy to have taken the time to create this and to have done this whole world building process overall, because now I feel like I understand this world so much better, and I'm excited to see what I can do next when I get on to outlining the actual story. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I'd improved at world building since the first time a year ago, and I thought this might be a crazy 5 days of work racing till the last second. Instead, I just spent the last 4.5 days enjoying some brainstorming and definitely enjoying some naming. And now my map isn't just some meaningless image, it's part of a complete world, a world fit to be the setting for my next series.